Most people don't realize this, but obsession never begins with pursuit. It begins with absence, not physical absence, but emotional detachment. The moment you stop making someone the center of your emotional universe, something quietly shifts in their mind. Up until that point, your attention was predictable, your reactions were guaranteed, your energy revolved around how she felt, what she said, and how she responded. And predictability kills fascination. When you detach emotionally, you remove yourself from a position of need and step back into a position of self command. Detachment doesn't mean coldness. It doesn't mean ignoring, punishing, or acting distant to provoke a reaction. That's still dependence, just disguised as control. True detachment happens internally first. It's the decision that your peace, confidence, and sense of worth no longer rise and fall based on our moods or approval. When you make that shift, your behavior naturally changes without effort. You listen instead of reacting, you observe instead of chasing. And she feels that difference immediately, even if she can't explain it. Most men think obsession is created by emotional intensity, long conversations, deep confessions, constant reassurance. But intensity without independence creates comfort, not desire. When she senses that your emotional world is self contained, that your happiness isn't anchored to her validation, she starts leaning in. The human mind becomes fixated on what it cannot fully access. Detachment creates a psychological gap, and the mind rushes to fill it. Reclaiming your center means bringing your focus back to your own life, your goals, your discipline, your routines, your sense of direction. When you stop orbiting her and start moving forward on your own path, you become grounded. And grounded men don't beg for attention, they attract it. She begins to feel like she's standing next to something solid instead of something emotionally hungry. Stability mixed with mystery is a powerful combination. There's also something deeper happening here. When you detach, you stop signaling fear of loss. Fear is loud. It shows up in over texting, over explaining, and over investing. Detachment, on the other hand, signals abundance. It tells her without words that you are choosing her, not clinging to her. That distinction changes the entire emotional dynamic. Choice feels powerful. Need feels heavy. As you reclaim your emotional center, you naturally stop seeking constant reassurance. You no longer need her to confirm your value, and paradoxically, that's when she starts questioning her own position. She begins to wonder whether she still holds the same influence over you. That uncertainty pulls her attention inward. She replays conversations. She analyzes your tone. She notices your calm. Obsession doesn't feel like excitement at first, it feels like mental noise she can't turn off. This is why detachment must be genuine. If you're pretending to detach just to trigger a response, the energy is still needy underneath. But when you truly let go of emotional dependency, the change is effortless. You speak slower, you react less, you become selective with your energy, and selectiveness is magnetic because it implies value. Detachment also protects you, it keeps you from losing yourself in someone else's emotions. It allows you to show up as a man who is centered, composed, and self directed. From that position, attraction becomes a byproduct, not a goal. You're no longer trying to make her obsessed. You're simply living in a way that makes obsession possible. And once you've reclaimed your center, everything else begins to fall into place naturally. Most men don't lose attraction because they do something wrong. They lose it because they give too much of the right thing too easily. Validation, praise, reassurance, when these are constant, automatic, and unconditional, they stop carrying weight, they become background noise. And the human mind doesn't obsess over what feels guaranteed. Obsession is born when something familiar suddenly becomes scarce, not withdrawn in anger, but no longer offered on demand. Withdrawing validation doesn't mean disappearing from her life. That's avoidance, not strength. Present stays, respect stays, calm stays. What changes is the reflex to reward every emotion, every mood, every action with approval. When you stop handing out validation like currency, you quietly shift the balance. She no longer feels emotionally fed just for showing up. And that's when awareness kicks in. Validation is powerful because it reinforces identity. When you constantly validate her choices, her feelings, her behavior, you become predictable. She knows exactly how you respond. There's no tension, no uncertainty, no internal dialogue. But when validation becomes selective, her mind starts asking questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I lose something? What changed? Those questions are the doorway to obsession. The key is that this withdrawal must be natural, not performative. You're not withholding praise to punish her or provoke anxiety. You're simply no longer overinvesting emotionally. You stop hyping every message. You stop reassuring every insecurity. You stop over explaining your feelings to make sure she feels safe. And in doing so, you send a powerful signal. Your approval is not automatic, it's earned through alignment, respect, and consistency. This shift often catches her off guard. She's used to your emotional presence being a constant source of affirmation. When that stream slows down, she becomes more aware of it than when it was flowing freely. Human psychology works this way. We notice absence more than presence. We miss what used to be easy and the mind starts reaching for it. What's important here is emotional neutrality. You don't become cold. You don't become distant. You simply stop amplifying her ego. You respond calmly instead of enthusiastically. You acknowledge without indulging. That restraint creates contrast, and contrast creates interest. She starts paying closer attention to your tone, your timing, your reactions. Obsession grows in the space where certainty used to live. Another layer to this is self respect. When you withdraw validation, you're also sending a message to yourself. You're reinforcing that your energy matters, that your emotional output is valuable, that not everyone automatically deserves access to it. This internal alignment sharpens your presence. You become more grounded, less reactive, more deliberate, and that composure is felt immediately. As validation becomes selective, she may start increasing her effort without realizing it. More messages, more curiosity, more emotional probing. Not because you demanded it, but because she feels the shift and wants to restore what changed. That's the core of obsession, not manipulation, but internal motivation. Her mind is now engaged without you pushing it there. Many men sabotage this moment by panicking and overgiving again. They sense her leaning in and rush to reassure, to explain, to pour validation back in. That collapses the tension instantly. Strength is staying steady, letting her sit with the uncertainty, letting her rediscover the value of your approval rather than assuming it. Withdrawing validation isn't about control, it's about balance. When your presence remains but your praise becomes intentional, you move from being emotionally available to emotionally valuable. And value is what the mind returns to again and again. Once validation is no longer guaranteed, attention follows naturally. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is learning to move forward without narrating your life to anyone. Most people announce change as a way of seeking recognition. They post, explain, justify, and signal improvement before it's fully embodied. But growth that is explained loses its edge. When you begin living loudly through action while staying quiet with words, you create something rare, mystery grounded in substance. When you stop explaining yourself, you remove her from the position of emotional witness and place her back into the position of observer. That change matters more than most realize. Observers wonder. Witnesses relax. When she no longer gets a running commentary on your thoughts, plans, and movements, her imagination fills the silence. And imagination is far more powerful than information. Living loudly doesn't mean trying to impress. It means committing fully to your own discipline. You wake up differently. You move with purpose. Your time becomes structured. Your energy becomes focused. You invest in your body, your work, your environment, and you do it without checking whether she noticed. That independence is felt instantly because it changes how you carry yourself. Your voice steadies, your presence sharpens. You're no longer seeking acknowledgement. You're operating from alignment. What unsettles her is not what you say, but what you no longer feel the need to say. When you stop explaining why you're busy, why you didn't reply immediately, or why you made a certain decision, you communicate confidence without words. Explanation often signals insecurity. Silence paired with consistency signals authority. She senses that something in you has solidified. Curiosity is triggered when patterns break. If you were once emotionally transparent, always available, always expressive, and suddenly you become focused, calm, and self directed, her mind starts scanning for meaning. She replays interactions. She analyzes your tone. She watches for clues, not because you asked her to, but because clarity has been replaced with ambiguity, and the mind hates unresolved gaps. This is where many men make a mistake. They think mystery comes from being vague or evasive. It doesn't. It comes from depth that isn't immediately accessible. You're not hiding. You're simply not volunteering. There's a difference. You answer when asked, but briefly. You share when it matters, not when you're bored or anxious. Your life becomes something she experiences in pieces, not something she has full access to. As you live this way, you'll notice something else shift. You stop seeking her reaction. You don't look for confirmation. You don't scan her face for approval. That detachment from outcome makes you grounded. And grounded men create emotional gravity. She feels drawn not because you pulled her in, but because you stopped orbiting her. There's also a subtle power in being seen evolving without explanation. When she notices changes, your confidence, your routine, your emotional steadiness, but doesn't receive a story to go with it, she fills in the blanks herself. And the stories people tell themselves are always more emotionally charged than the truth. Obsession feeds on interpretation, not facts. This approach also protects your progress. When you don't announce growth, you don't invite outside opinions into something still forming, you allow your new identity to stabilize. That stability shows up in how you speak, how you listen, and how you move through interactions. You're no longer performing change, you're embodying it. Living loudly without explaining isn't about secrecy. It's about self respect. It's choosing to let results speak instead of words. And when she senses that your life is expanding without her being the narrator of it, something shifts inside her. She leans in, not because you asked her to, but because she feels there's more beneath the surface. And once curiosity replaces certainty, attention follows naturally. Attraction is deeply tied to rhythm. And most people don't realize how much power lies in timing. When you respond instantly, emotionally, and without pause, you hand over control of that rhythm. Your availability becomes assumed. Your attention becomes expected. And expectation quietly drains intrigue. The shift happens when you stop moving at her pace and begin moving at your own calmly, deliberately, without explanation. Responding slowly doesn't mean ignoring messages or playing childish games. It means you no longer interrupt your life to prove interest. You finish what you're doing. You stay present where you are. You respond when it's natural for you, not when anxiety tells you to. That small change sends a powerful signal. Your time is structured and your attention has weight. Calmness is the multiplier here. Anyone can delay a response, but very few can do it without emotional tension underneath. When your replies are steady, relaxed, and grounded, they feel different. There's no rush to impress, no urgency to secure her reaction, no emotional spikes. That composure shifts the dynamic instantly. She starts to feel like you're not chasing the moment, you're choosing it. Speed often communicates need, even when intentions are good. Fast replies, overlong explanations, immediate emotional engagement, all of it suggests that her response carries more importance than it should. When you slow down, you communicate independence. You show that your life doesn't pause waiting for her input. And independence is unsettling in the best way because it introduces uncertainty. Once the rhythm changes, her awareness heightens. She notices gaps. She checks her phone more often. She becomes conscious of timing in a way she wasn't before, not because you're withholding, but because the emotional certainty she relied on is softened, and the mind fills that softness with thought. Thought becomes focus. Focus becomes obsession. The key is consistency. One slow response doesn't change anything. A calm, steady pattern does. When your emotional tone remains even regardless of her energy, whether she's warm, distant, playful, or distracted, you become psychologically anchored. You're no longer reacting to her mood swings, you're holding your own center. That steadiness creates contrast, and contrast creates pull. Another important shift here is that you stop explaining your timing. You don't justify why you were busy. You don't apologize for living your life. Explanation invites negotiation. Calm presence ends it. When you reply as if your timing is normal, because it is, you reinforce the idea that access to you is a privilege, not a right. As this pattern settles in, she begins adjusting to you instead of the other way around. She matches your pace, she waits, she wonders. That reversal is subtle but powerful. It's not dominance, it's balance being restored. You're no longer emotionally available on demand. You're emotionally available by choice. Many men break this moment by overcorrecting. They feel the shift and suddenly go silent, cold, or distant. That creates confusion, not attraction. The power is in remaining warm but unhurried, present but unreactive, interested but not consumed. That combination is rare, and rarity holds attention. When you respond slowly and calmly, you also protect your emotional state. You give yourself space to think instead of react. You speak from intention instead of impulse. That clarity sharpens your communication and reduces regret. You're no longer chasing connection, you're allowing it to meet you where you stand. Over time, she begins associating your presence with emotional regulation. You feel safe, you feel grounded, you feel different from the noise she's used to. And that difference becomes magnetic, not because you tried to control the interaction, but because you controlled yourself. Once the rhythm belongs to you, the dynamic shifts without a word being spoken. Boundaries are one of the most misunderstood forces in attraction. Most people think boundaries are about control, confrontation, or dominance. In reality, boundaries are about self definition. They quietly communicate what you value, what you tolerate, and how you expect to be treated without needing to argue or convince anyone. And when boundaries are set calmly without emotion or drama, they carry far more weight than raised voices ever could. The moment you tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your standards, you teach someone how to treat you, not through words, but through acceptance. Every time you explain away disrespect, excuse inconsistency, or stay silent to avoid tension, you erode your own position. Boundaries reverse that erosion. They reestablish structure, and structure creates psychological safety, even when it creates temporary discomfort. What makes boundaries powerful is neutrality, no anger, no lectures, no ultimatums, just a quiet refusal to participate in what doesn't feel right. When you respond calmly instead of emotionally, you don't escalate the situation, you define it. She may test, question, or push back, but inside something registers. She realizes there are lines she can't cross without consequence. Most men fail here because they believe setting boundaries will push her away, and sometimes it does if she only valued access without respect. But when boundaries are delivered with composure, they don't repel attraction, they sharpen it. They signal strength without aggression, confidence without ego. And that combination is rare. Setting boundaries without drama also removes her leverage. Emotional reactions give power away. Calm firmness takes it back. When you don't argue your standards, you communicate that they're not negotiable. You don't need agreement, you don't need validation, you simply act in alignment with them. That clarity forces her to adjust or walk away. This is where obsession often begins to form, not because she's being controlled, but because she's being challenged internally. She starts paying closer attention to her behavior. She becomes more aware of how she shows up. She wonders how to stay within your frame instead of pulling you into hers. That mental recalibration keeps you on her mind. Boundaries also protect your emotional energy. They prevent resentment from building. Resentment is what turns attraction into frustration. When you honor yourself early and consistently, you don't need to explode later. You remain centered, and centered men don't chase respect, they naturally command it. Another important aspect is that boundaries must be enforced through action, not words. You don't threaten consequences, you simply follow through quietly. If something doesn't align, you remove yourself. If a pattern repeats, you disengage without hostility. That consistency makes your boundaries real. Inconsistency turns them into empty statements. You may react emotionally at first. That's normal. Boundaries disrupt comfort. But discomfort isn't damage, it's awareness. When she realizes you won't bend yourself to maintain access, she starts valuing that access more. Not because she's afraid, because it now requires mutual respect. What's critical here is that you don't set boundaries to get a reaction. You set them because they reflect who you are. The obsession that follows is a byproduct, not the goal. When you stay calm, firm, and self respecting, you remove chaos from the dynamic, and when chaos disappears, clarity takes its place. Clarity is addictive. It makes people feel grounded even when they're uncertain. She may not always like your boundaries, but she'll feel their presence. And that presence changes how she thinks about you when you're not around. When boundaries are set without anger, they don't end attraction, they deepen it. Everything changes the moment you are truly willing to lose her, not as a threat, not as a tactic, but as an internal truth you've already accepted. Most people think attraction comes from holding on tighter, from proving value, from doing more to secure someone's place in your life. In reality, the deepest shift happens when you stop gripping altogether. When you loosen your hands, your posture straightens, your voice steadies, your energy settles into something unmistakably grounded. Fear of loss is the invisible force behind most destructive behavior. It's what drives over texting, emotional bargaining, silent resentment, and tolerating what you shouldn't. When you're afraid to lose her, every interaction carries weight, every response feels loaded, every change in tone feels dangerous. That fear leaks out no matter how well you try to hide it. And it quietly repels attraction because it signals dependence. The willingness to lose her removes that fear completely. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop compromising your values to preserve access. You stop measuring your words to avoid conflict. And paradoxically, that freedom makes you more attractive than any strategy ever could. You're no longer trying to keep her, you're choosing whether she fits into your life. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop clinging. Care without attachment feels different. It's calm, it's steady, it doesn't demand reassurance. When she senses that you're emotionally present but not emotionally trapped, something shifts inside her. She realizes that your presence is optional, not guaranteed, and the human mind pays close attention to what isn't guaranteed. Being willing to lose her also restores your authority over yourself. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to prove points. You don't need to chase closure. If something doesn't align, you're prepared to walk away quietly. That readiness creates a kind of silent power, not dominance, not control, but self trust. And self trust is deeply unsettling to anyone who's used to holding emotional leverage. Many men confuse this with indifference. It's not indifference, it's detachment rooted in abundance. You're not saying she's replaceable. You're saying you're complete. Your life has structure, meaning, and direction beyond her. She becomes an addition, not a requirement. And when someone feels like an addition instead of a necessity, they feel chosen. Choice is intoxicating. This is often the point where her behavior changes. She becomes more attentive, more curious, more invested, not because you demanded anything, but because she senses a shift in power. The power no longer sits in her ability to withdraw, it sits in your ability to remain steady either way. That uncertainty pulls her focus inward. She wonders where she stands. She reevaluates how she shows up. Obsession grows in that space of self questioning. What's important is that you don't weaponize this mindset. You don't threaten to leave. You don't hint at disappearing. You don't test her reactions. You simply live as someone who would survive and thrive without her. That authenticity is felt instantly. People can sense when detachment is real versus performed. Being willing to lose her also protects your future self. It prevents you from staying too long in situations that slowly drain you. It keeps your standards intact. It allows you to walk away with dignity instead of resentment. And that dignity lingers long after conversations end. It's remembered. When she realizes that your world doesn't collapse without her, something fundamental shifts in how she sees you. You're no longer someone to manage or predict. You're someone she must meet at your level. And that recalibration doesn't happen consciously, it happens emotionally. In the end, the readiness to lose her is what frees you from trying to control the outcome. And when control disappears, authenticity takes its place. That authenticity is rare, it's grounding, and it's the foundation obsession that doesn't fade quickly. Once you're no longer afraid to lose her, you become impossible to ignore.